Hello, BookTube. I had appointments early this morning, literally first thing this morning. And when they were done, it was a brutally humid morning. It was so humid that the air was wavy and there was low-lying fog all over Greater Boston. It was that bad. The type of atmosphere where you step outside of an air-conditioned room and suddenly you feel like you are covered in wet sweaters. And you just have to labor under that weight, even though the heat itself wasn't that bad. But as usual, when I was done with those appointments, I was within striking distance of the Brattle Bookshop in downtown Boston, right as they were opening. Those of you who are new to the channel, the Brattle is a used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston. They're very old, but they are not antiquarian except on the third floor of their building. The rest of it is just a jam-packed general interest used bookstore that is incredibly good. Not least because they are always out buying. The turnover is incredible. And on top of all that, I mean, that would make it a destination anyway, but on top of all that, there's a sale lot right next door to the store. Not a sale barrow or a couple of sale barrows, not a portion of the sidewalk, like some of you might be familiar with from the Strand in New York City, but the whole of a lot. Thousands of books for $1, $3, and $5. I've been going to that sale lot as long as it's existed, and I very much love it. And today was an extra treat because Hannah from Hannah's Books, the BookTube channel, Hannah's Books, one of the cool kids, her and Britta and Olive and Sean the Book Maniac, she is in town with her husband and her son. And so if you're in Boston, you of course have to go to the Brattle with Steve. It's just the way it is. And so we met at the Brattle, and that was an absolute delight. Absolutely delightful. And we did a lot of shopping out in the sale lot. It really does make sense. No matter what you're looking for, there's no organization of any kind out in the sale lot, either by quality of book, there's plenty of junk out there, but there's also plenty of great stuff out there, or even collectability of book. There are plenty of books out there that are very old, as you're going to see. It doesn't really matter. The staff at the Brattle, they have been trained by one of the best book price estimators in the country. And they have the big buying and pricing table right inside the front door. And if they look at a book and say, well, old or new, this won't sell in the shop, then they put it out in the sale lot. So you can find a lot of great stuff out there. And I was very pleased to see that Hannah had an armload of books. And when she showed them to me, her armload of books was so quintessentially Hannah that I feel certain if I had said I was at the Brattle with someone and not identified them and just told you what the books were, you'd say, oh, that looks a lot like something that Hannah's books would assemble. And we went our separate ways when our Brattle trip was over. Is it possible that Hannah and I will share space on camera before she leaves to go back down south? Entirely possible. But in the meantime, I've got a pile of books that I want to show you. Now, keep in mind, I've mentioned on this channel a few times, I am building a sale pile on the kitchen floor of books that are going out. What BookTube calls an unhaul. I am steadily doing that. And you might, and I get books in the mail as well, so you might think, why on earth would you go and get a pile of books with Brattle, much less do it every time you go there? And the key is that I view it as waves of accretion. They're waves of accretion. I scoop things up at the Brattle sale lot because they're so cheap. It's so easy to do that you'd be foolish not to. So I scoop up everything at the Brattle sale lot that's of even remotely serious interest. If it's a pure whim, then I usually won't grab it. But if a couple of tumblers click when I see it, much less all of them, if every once in a while I'll find a book out in that sale lot that makes me squee out loud with joy. But if a few tumblers click, then I get the thing. Hence the piles of books every time I do a Brattle book haul. But these don't stay. The goal at the Brattle or anywhere else is to get keepers, is to get books that are going to stay in my library as long as I have a library. Not all of these, I'm sure that not all of these will be that. It's just that when you're out in the sale lot, the prices are so low, you can take chances. The way some of you will be, if you're very old, you'll be old enough to remember when retail bookstores when retail book pricing was like that, and you could take a chance on a total unknown. It's not that way anymore. The lowest price for a book in your bookstore is $10 now, and they just go up from there. We've seen on this channel, brand new releases from major publishing houses are routinely now $40. $40 for one book. Not in the sale lot, however. So I got a wide variety of stuff, and we'll just go through these, starting with this thing. This is for my my renovated bookcase area for books, for books about reviews, prefaces afterwards, publishing memoirs, that sort of thing. I have a large number of those books. It's growing all the time. I love reading them. It is, after all, my own profession on both ends of the spectrum. I am a fairly prolific book reviewer, and I'm also a book section editor. So I have it on both sides there, and I've been doing this for a long time. That kind of writing just thrills right through me, because I can pick out a name, whether it's a name that's long forgotten or a name that's extremely august and incorporated into the canon. And when I read even one page of that sort of stuff, I can say, okay, well, you might have won a National Book Award and a couple of Pulitzers, you might be on the literary pantheon, but I know just what you're doing on this page. I know it intimately. I know exactly what you're doing, and I know why you're doing it. You're doing it for the money, and you're doing it under a deadline, and you're doing it under a stricture of the ideology, the editorial philosophy of the venue, and also a word count. This is not like the rest of your writing, and it's immediately recognizable to me. And this is a book that I didn't know existed. This is called Broadsides by the great novelist Mordecai Rickler. This has a Canadian price tag on it. He wrote St. Urbain's Horseman. He wrote The Apprenticeship of Dudley Kravitz. He wrote Solomon Gursky Was Here, which I think is great. I actually think they're all great. I don't recall reading a major novel of his that I didn't think was brilliant. And this is, as you can see, reviews and opinions. This is a collection of his deadline work. I'm assuming this is a Canadian Penguin edition. I wonder if this is going to tell me. I bet it is. Yeah, this is a Canadian mass market Penguin edition, probably the only one that I have. And it is Mordecai Rickler writing about, who do we got here? Hemingway, All Quiet on the Western Front, dystopian fiction, Thy Neighbor's Wife, and a whole bunch of roundup things, roundup pieces that were probably popular with his editor. Again, I will read those things and I will say, I know exactly why you're doing this. But this is a mass market paperback. I think it might be the only mass market paperback in that entire bookcase. All the rest of them are trades and hardcovers. Then these next two are also mass market paperbacks. These took me back. These are from, I believe, the 1980s, when all the world made sense. Oh no, 1975. 1975, okay. These, I found two mass market science fiction novels of Robert Heinlein, who, if he's in the canon at all anymore, is in the canon for Stranger in a Strange Land, which until the 21st century would routinely have been listed by myself and everybody else as one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time. I still think that it is. But even in the 1980s, there were plenty of us, myself included, who read Stranger in a Strange Land and said, okay, well, this is great, but it's also very, very sexist. In fact, it's proud of being sexist. I wouldn't say misogynistic, but definitely sexist. And, well, of course, that doesn't fly. In 2021, that doesn't fly. Thanks to the puritanical censors that we have set in power over ourselves, there is now a codex of forbidden works, canceled authors, that sort of thing. So I don't know what is going on with Robert Heinlein now. The two books that I got today, I remember from when they came out. They have Darrell K. Sweet covers. He's much more famous for his fantasy covers than for his science fiction covers. And they are basically boys' adventure stories. Both of them are. The first one is Space Cadet. Look at that. That is awesome. Only the best and the brightest, the strongest and most courageous ever managed to become space cadets. They were the elite guard of the solar system, accepting missions others feared, taking risks no others dared, and upholding the peace of the solar system for the benefit of all. and of course, this was written in the late 1940s. I didn't read it in the late 1940s, but I did read it. I have read this a few times. I'm very much looking forward to reading it again. If I'm going to get all of Heinlein, I want it in these old Del Rey. These are Del Rey. Yes, these old Del Rey mass market paperbacks with the old cover artwork. That's how I want them. That's why I grabbed these. And, you know, time has passed, right? Space Cadet has entered into the language in a totally different way than it's meant in this book. Heinlein couldn't have foreseen that. He couldn't have controlled it. It's just time changes, right? Partisans take hold of terms. Terms transmute over their usage in society, so that words that were once praiseworthy or neutral are suddenly, in any sane or rational company, insults. Space Cadet would be a perfect example. Republican would be another example, maybe even feminist. The type of thing where if you're going to call yourself that sort of thing, you immediately need to start explaining, because the connotations are largely negative in the 21st century, deservedly or not. And Space Cadet is the oldest of those, the oldest and the saddest of those, because I remember this being a very effective novel. I will give it another try. And another one was, this other one is another Robert Heinlein, also in the late 1940s. This is Rocket Ship Galileo. Another Dower K. Sweet cover, just fantastic. These things are works of art. There ought to be a big hardcover annotated reference work of the cover artwork of Dower K. Sweet. Take all the header material off, just give us the paintings with bracketed material at the bottom explaining the name of the book, when it came out, that sort of thing. I would love a book like that. If it exists and I don't know about it, please tell me. But this is, they called themselves the Galileo Club. Not a bad name for a group of space-minded young men who had high hopes of putting one of their homemade rocket ships in orbit. Suddenly, the three earthbound youths and their mentor were hurling through space, heading for the barren wasteland of the moon, or so they thought. They were actually unaware that the dark crater shadows concealed a threat beyond their wildest imaginings, a threat from which only a miracle could save them. The cover says, when amateur astronomers finally reached the moon, they found the most unexpected welcoming committee. You have to keep in mind, not when this was reissued, not when Dower K. Sweet did this cover artwork, but when this book was written, the moon was, no pun intended, but terra incognita. We were a long way off from actually knowing much about it. And the same thing is true in Space Cadet. If I remember correctly, the members of the Space Cadet class that we see here hail from all over the galaxy. Venus, I think there's a boy from Venus. I think there's a boy from one of Jupiter's moons. Because when Heinlein was writing these things, we didn't know. Probes had not gone to tell us that nothing could live on Venus, underneath the clouds of Venus, that nothing could live on the surface of Mars. That, oddly enough, maybe things can live in the subterranean oceans of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, but not sentient life with hands and technology, nothing like that. We didn't know anything like this. These are perfect examples of when science fiction migrates into science fact, and then the whole genre has to change. Those were the mass market paperbacks, although these next two are pretty small. They could almost be mass market paperbacks. This one is a find. The critic Michael Dirda. This is Michael Dirda on Conan Doyle. A slim book of his in which he writes about all of Arthur Conan Doyle. Large part of this book, I think, if I remember correctly, is given over to the Sherlock Holmes stories, but large parts otherwise too, with generous ruminations on some of Doyle's contemporaries and near contemporaries. There's a great deal. If I remember correctly, I think I read this once when it came out, and if I remember correctly, there's a great deal of very good, sympathetic, intelligent writing on Robert Louis Stevenson, and also on Lord Dunsany, which is great. To get any kind of intelligent consideration of Lord Dunsany is incredible. So this is, it's not a biography of Arthur Conan Doyle, although I'm sure in it has all the details that you would need. So I don't know, is it going on that shelf or not? Is it going on that shelf with the Mordecai Rickler? Could very well be. Could very well be. I don't have to worry about that shelf anymore. It's got all the room in the world. It's never going to run out of room. This next one actually is a biography. Every time fate drops this particular penny, I now wince just a little because it feels like the footsteps of doom. This is Marcel Proust again. This is Edmund White's little biography of him for the old Penguin Live series. I've talked about this series before on this channel. This is a paperback. I had most of them in hardcover. They were a project that Penguin did of just go to an author who's not a dedicated scholar on the subject. So, you know, go to a writer of novels, or a popular critic or something like that, and get them to write about a figure. And don't let them take any longer than, well, this is 163 pages. They're usually the type of thing you can read very quickly. They're usually the shortest biographies of their subjects. I'm pretty sure this is the shortest biography of Marcel Proust ever written. This is by Edmund White, the great novelist, Edmund White, who is gay, as Proust certainly was, and who is a novelist and a writer of novels that are very much in a Proustian register, and a lot of his novels are very much in a Proustian register. It's a match made in heaven. And sometimes you would get that with the Penguin Live series. Sometimes you would get that. You would get Larry McMurtry to write about Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse or something like that. But sometimes the matches weren't intuitive. Roy Blount, for instance, writing about Robert E. Lee. One of the best books in this series is his little biography of Robert E. Lee. And most famously of all, the one that I praised the most, Elizabeth Hardwick, writing about Herman Melville, and outdoing in insight a great many of the much longer Melville biographies that were out there. I don't know that I've ever read this particular... Did someone write on the cover? Goodness gracious, someone did. They wrote their name on the cover in pen. Lucky thing I can't read it. They'd be so canceled. But who else have we got here? We've got, okay, Larry McMurtry wrote on Crazy Horse. Peter Gay wrote on Mozart. Gary Wills on St. Augustine. That was really good. That was a really good volume. James Smiley on Charles Dickens. Carol Shields on Jane Austen. The problem with that, with Carol Shields is also a very, very talented writer, very, very talented novelist. And her book about Jane Austen in this series is good. But unlike Proust, Jane Austen has had a great number of very short biographies. Really, the amount of information that we have about her that isn't extrapolation and plaster o' Paris only yields itself to a short biography. Not to dismiss the longer biographies that have been written, but David Cecil wrote a sketch of her that's as good as anything that anybody has written at 5 times the length. Who else have we got here? Mary Gordon on Joan of Arc, Karen Armstrong on the Buddha, Jonathan Spence on Mao Zedong, Patricia Bosworth on Marlon Brando, Edna O'Brien on James Joyce. They can have each other, is what me Sainted Ma would have said. R.W.B. Lewis, the great Edith Wharton biographer, on Dante. Janet Malcolm on Anton Chekhov. Marshall Frady on Martin Luther King Jr. and Paul Johnson on Andrew Carnegie. Paul Johnson on Andrew Carnegie. So windbag against windbag. But this, of course, has relevance for this channel because I have not yet changed my mind about Proust-tober. An event that I'm allowing the goads of the Furies to drive me to do in October, where I grapple with Remembrance of Things Past for the next definitive and I hope last time. And in the interstices between other reading and in the lead up to Proust-tober, I will be reading a lot about Proust. There's a huge brick of a biography of him that I don't think I can scale again. But this I can certainly do. And also not only that, but also this. I can go through all of these books. I've got hundreds of them in that space over there. Almost every person on that bookcase has probably written about Proust at one time or another, and reading all of those together, that might do a lot. I'll certainly learn a lot, whether I like Remembrance of Things Past or not. This next one is a Penguin trade paperback, but once again, I don't think this ever came out in the U.S. I don't remember it at all. I don't think I've ever seen it before. And my guy at the Brattle, who I've known for his whole adult life, and who has had, Jason Harrigan used to say on his late lamented channel, he used to say that probably millions of books had passed through his hands, as not only a book aficionado and a book reader, but a book dealer. And this kid is the same way. I shouldn't say kid. He's not a kid anymore, but I will always think of him that way. Millions of books have passed through his hands. And he has a phenomenal recall for what he's seen. And he looked at this and said, I've never seen this before. This is the Penguin Book of Lies. Which could be that it never came out in this country. That might be why. It's edited by Philip Kerr, the late Philip Kerr, who is the author of the Bernie Gunther novels that I cannot praise highly enough. Just police procedural historical murder mysteries that if you haven't read one, you will love them. Absolutely love them. Find the omnibus edition. What BookTube, despite my admonitions, still calls bind-ups. Like we were little kids. Like we were little kids packing up our lunchboxes in order to go to the Scholastic Books Fair. If you can find the omnibus edition of 3 early Philip Kerr Bernie Gunther novels called Berlin Noir, get it. I feel certain you will have the same reaction to Berlin Noir that I did and that everyone else has had, which is that you get to the end of it and your main reaction will be, I want more Bernie Gunther. And there's a lot more Bernie Gunther, so it's a great feeling to have at the end of that book. But he must have an introduction here, and this will be just a collection of lying, which is kind of strange. So I guess there'll be things in here about lying. Like, for instance, there's an excerpt from Thomas Aquinas, "Is every lie a mortal sin?" But I imagine there'll also be examples of lying. Naturally, the first name that comes to my mind is Benvenuto Cellini, because he wrote a book. He wrote an autobiography that is, pretty much all lies. It's one gigantic whopper after another. It's delightful, absolutely delightful. I can't praise it enough. But yes, okay, Benvenuto Cellini is in here, and also the tedious tail-chasing essay by, of course, Montaigne. It will be in here on lying. Well, first we should consider it this way, and then we should consider it that way, and then we should go back to considering the first way because we've forgotten what we thought the first time. But this is bound to be lots and lots of fun, so I had to grab it. It was dirt cheap. This next one is a Pikador trade paperback of something that we've seen on this channel. I've hauled it at the Brattle before, but only as a large hardcover. And I got rid of it. I had the large hardcover and I got rid of it to one of you. One of you emailed me. I leave my email on every video. Feel free to email me about any little thing that's troubling your pretty little head. Of course, in context of this particular video, I'm not actually encouraging you to email me and ask me for these books. I kind of want to hold on to them all. But I did get rid of this, and my very thought when I did was, the Brattle will provide, which is the phrase that I use for the Brattle because of their turnover. I saw probably, I don't know, conservatively probably 500 books in the sale lot today that were not there last week. That's a pretty good turnover, and sometimes it's more than that. And since I have that, and since so many people don't, if somebody sends me a plaintive missive from rural New Zealand saying, I really like the look of that book, but I'll never find it on my own, and I'm understandably leery about shopping online, would you mind sending it to me? I typically did, not anymore. Don't get any ideas. I typically did, saying the Brattle will provide. I found it once there, I will certainly find it again. And it took a while, but the Brattle did provide. Here, this is Eric Newby, and this is a book of traveler's tales. This is a Pikador trade paperback of his collection of essays and excerpts from travel writing spanning the whole world. I believe this is set up according to region rather than according to era. Yes, it is. So you'd go to Africa and you would get his selections from 10 centuries of African travelers giving their stories when they come back home. This is a trade paperback. I tend to be pretty hard on those, and I remember really liking this book, but it's better than nothing. It'll certainly stand up to one more reading. I'm not 100% sure. Actually, since this is set up by region, I won't know. But I'm hoping, this is one of the rare instances. Usually when I talk about anthologies, I roll my eyes when the editor includes himself. I don't think that should ever happen. Except if you are as talented a travel writer as Eric Newby is. In which case, I mean, if anybody else edited a big, generous anthology of travel writing, they would never think for a minute not to include him. Never in a minute. You include Herodotus, you include Patrick Lee Frommer, you include Eric Newby. If you're making an anthology of travel writing, you include him. He's one of the best. You include Jan Morris. So I'm kind of breaking my own rule. I'm kind of hoping that he included something from himself in here. We shall see. It's a trade paperback. I'm a little leery of that, just because recently I took on my actually, speaking of Jan Morris, I took on the Pax Britannia trilogy, which I have in old trade paperbacks. A great atmospheric trilogy of British history, from the accession of Queen Victoria and the absolute heyday of the Victorian Empire, all the way to the dark days immediately following World War II. A trilogy that was written by Jan Morris when Jan Morris was James Morris. And I took down those 3 volumes to sort of go through them, and oh my God, they are not well made at all. Not at all. They were cracking and creaking and crinkling all over. They're not. I don't believe they're readable. It's possible that with a great deal of care, the middle volume, Pax Britannia, it's At Heaven's Command, Pax Britannia, and Farewell the Trumpets. It's possible that with a great deal of care, the middle volume, Pax Britannia, is readable. But the others, I don't think they are. I think they have to. I think they're on the edge of breaking apart, which is a terrible shame, because I don't have any backups for those. I don't have any ebooks of the Pax Britannia trilogy, and I don't have any hardcovers. I don't think I've ever seen it in any other format than those trade paperbacks. Although I've heard a rumor that the Folio Society does them. Unfortunately, Steve and the Folio Society do not get along at all. I love what they do. I absolutely love their editorial choices, their mission. But they make very pretty, very valuable books, and I'm hard on my books, so that's not an option unless I were to find a Folio Society trilogy on eBay for $2 or something like that. But I'm still thinking this will take a read. It won't be as sturdy as the Penguin trade paperback, but I'm thinking I can do it. Then this next one, a pure example of just trying something because it was $1. Just branching out and trying something. This is by Ferdinand Mount, who I'm assuming is still alive. He was a poobah at the TLS for a long time and wrote a novel called Jem and Sam, the Sam of whom in the title is Samuel Pepys. Jem and Sam is an absolutely terrific historical novel, just fantastic. And he has a new book. He's still writing, so he's probably still alive. Although that doesn't stop Roberto Bolaño, who's been dead for 20 years and written more books than most people who are alive have written. Ferdinand Mount has a new book coming out in September, I believe, of 2021. The utterly unguessable, appalling year 2021. I'm sure that when he was roistering in Fleet Street in the 1980s, he didn't think he'd reach 2021. None of us did. But this is Umbrella. And it's a novel of his about George Gordon, cousin to Lord Byron. And that is Thomas Charles. That is a portrait on the cover. I don't think it's attributed. No, isn't that a crime? It's not attributed in anywhere in the copyright information of the book or on the back. It's just not attributed. That is actually a portrait of George Gordon, Byron's cousin. Just so that you know that really startling good looks ran in the whole extended family when every man was young. When they were young. Before they were 25 or 26, they were all fairly good looking. None as beautiful as Byron, but I think George comes pretty close. And this is a novel about him. Heir to a desolate Scottish estate, superficially enjoys a brilliant career. He dines at Malmaison with Napoleon and Josephine, excavates the Acropolis, shares a night in a hayloft with Metternich, inherits the earldom of Aberdeen, marries 2 beautiful women, becomes foreign secretary twice, and then ultimately prime minister. Yet Lord Aberdeen remains an awkward, tragic figure, increasingly at odds with his time, shattered by repeated bereavements, loathed, abused, and eventually driven out of office by his fellow countrymen for a doomed effort to prevent the Crimean War. And this, despite that description, this is a novel. This is a fictionalized biography of George Gordon. by Ferdinand Mount. I don't think I've ever read anything by Ferdinand Mount that I didn't love. Although I didn't do my due diligence, I didn't research ahead of time. I'd be willing to bet that in England, in the UK, Ferdinand Mount has probably come out with at least one collection of exactly the sort of thing that I was talking about. A collection of reviews, of book reviews, of book work. He's a perfect example of the type of person that does that kind of work for the entirety of his life. They don't ever highlight it, but every once in a while they might, if their editor thinks that there's any kind of saleability, they might collect a few into a book. I'd be willing to bet that he's done that at least once, and what I wouldn't give for those volumes. What I wouldn't give to add them to my newly increased area. But I don't even want to look. Probably they would be extortionate prices on eBay. but I'll definitely take this, especially since I'm going to be grappling with his new novel probably sometime this week. This next one is a guidebook, but it's an old-fashioned guidebook. Lots and lots of text, lots of original artwork, in addition to black and white photos. This is a guidebook by A. McAvoy McIntyre of Beacon Hill. This is a walking tour of Beacon Hill. But it doesn't just have the photos. It also has original artwork. There's Mount Vernon Street. And this is a guidebook to a storied part of Boston. A part of Boston that is 1 minute's walk away from the Brattle Bookshop. The Brattle Bookshop is in a relatively flat area at the foot of Beacon Hill, which used to be 3 hills. You can walk up from the Brattle, you walk up the street to Boston Common, and then when you get to Boston Common, when you free yourself from the wall of buildings and you're on Boston Common, you can look up at the State House with its gold dome, and circling, and the State House is nested on Beacon Hill. All of these wonderful cobblestone homes are all around there. This has high definition black and white photos of all of those areas. A lot of them are from above or from the side. None of them, as far as I know, if I remember correctly from this book, there's Pinckney Street. I used to have a place on Pinckney Street, probably $400,000 a month now. As far as I know, there are no pictures in here of inside any of these houses. There might be a few. I have been inside almost all of the houses on Beacon Hill, almost all of them. And I know, well, there are a couple of people who might have contested, but they're both dead. I'm pretty sure that I probably know as much about the day-to-day, decade-to-decade, century-to-century history of those houses as anyone alive. Who's lived in them and for how long, who they were, how they made their money, how they lost their money, who they were, what they wrote, where they went, what kind of patron they were at the Boston Athenaeum. I'm pretty sure I probably know more about that than anybody currently alive, which is kind of weird. I should probably get it all down in a book now, shouldn't I? And you might think, well, why would you need this thing if you know all that? But I love stuff like this. Bostoniana, I just love stuff like that. This next one, I should probably have warned you ahead of time. This video might be a little on the long side. We don't make videos that are shorter than 40 minutes on this channel. At least you get to look at the bean, right? This next one is an ongoing psychological struggle between me and an author. And you might think that you've already seen that with Marcel Proust. But it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same. I have never been able to love Proust. I've never been able to love Remembrance of Things Past, In Search of Lost Time, however you want to call it. I've never been able to love it with even a tiny fraction of the breathless idolatry that it evokes in the French, for instance. And it has also some English-speaking fans that I know that's out there. And I haven't closed the door. There's a part of me that says, not only is that out there, but it might be warranted. You might just be missing this thing completely, despite multiple attempts. But this next author, oh my, that feeling, whatever that feeling is infinitely more pronounced, infinitely more. This is a struggle that we've seen on this channel for years now. We've known each other for years. We've been talking every day for years. I've been irritating your spouses for years. Who is that guy? Why are you always listening to him? What's gone wrong with our marriage? And of course, the figure I'm talking about is Charles Dickens, who, even in 2021, a knee-jerk, off-the-cuff, back-of-the-envelope estimate from almost any serious reader would put him in the top 5 writers who've ever lived. Certainly when you talk fiction. You know, Dickens is mentioned in the same breath as Shakespeare, as Tolstoy. And he always has been. He always has been. The great literary figures that lived in all of these houses on Beacon Hill revered him just shy of idolatry. They loved his work, quoted it, knew it backwards and forwards. I knew readers in the 20th century who knew his work backwards and forwards. I have read him so many times trying to find that magic, and I have totally failed to do it. Totally. Unlike, for instance, Anthony Trollope. Of course, unlike Thackeray. I've largely failed with Wilkie Collins too, but I don't beat myself up about that because I don't think Wilkie Collins is good. Just objectively, the critic in me reads a Wilkie Collins and says, okay, I can see why that would interest a lot of readers. It's kind of thrilling in a junky kind of way, but this is not good. This is not good. in anything like the way that Trollope is good when he's good, in anything like the way that Mrs. Gaskell is good when she's good. Dickens, though, no. I, of course, come closer to him when I'm reading his nonfiction. He wrote a gigantic amount of it, and I think a lot of it is really good. But I have bought so many biographies of this man and read them. I've reread the books so many times, so many studies, and I have not managed to crack the case. I have not managed to see that magic. I hope to before I die. There's nothing I would like better. I am not dismissing Dickens fans in the way that I shouldn't say, I was going to say in the way I dismiss Stephen King fans, but I don't dismiss Stephen King fans at all. All I do is maintain that they have channeled their experience with Stephen King, new or old books, into something that is no longer reading. That's all I say, that it's no longer reading. You're perfectly welcome to it, especially since it's done nothing but enrich your life. And hats off to him for doing that. But it's not the same. I don't dismiss Dickens readers because I have always had a suspicion that they might be right, that they might be seeing something that I'm not seeing. The classic old phrase, 40 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. And I have found over the years of trying to get at this author that I tend to like him a lot. Not his fiction, but whenever he speaks directly, his letters, his public utterances in big biographies, like Peter Ackroyd's big biography of him. Peter Ackroyd wrote a big, fat, wonderful biography of Dickens. Whenever I hear Dickens himself, and since he was world famous in his lifetime, we have a lot of that. Whenever I hear Dickens himself, I immediately click. I immediately think, I would have liked you. As a person, as a friend, I would have liked you a lot. And I also love the outline of his life, right? He wasn't just a famous writer. He wrote all the time. He could not stop writing. He didn't want to. He loved it. He clearly loved it. And I love that about him. I also love to write. But it's the outline of his life is that when he wasn't doing, dramatic speaking tours or writing the famous books, he was an editor. He was a book reviewer and a book section editor. And worked really hard at it, at Household Words and All the Year Round. He worked really hard at those. He wanted them to succeed. They weren't just left-handed exercises. And every time in a biography of him that I've come across that part of his life, Dickens as an editor, as a jobbing writer and an editor, someone who's dealing with other writers, someone who's dealing with making a good issue on deadline. I know that world. I know it extremely well on a much lower level, but still, and that's like I mentioned about those book review collections, it speaks directly to me. And I've often thought, well, maybe that's a way in. Maybe if you get to know that Dickens, you will then hear that Dickens when you read his fiction. And it won't be, the magic will suddenly be there. So I thought it was a godsend today when I found this thing from 1903. I think this is from 1903. 1912. This is Charles Dickens as editor. This is exactly what I was looking for. This is, there's the man himself. This was a big, heavy hardcover from a century ago. I had to cut the pages. The pages were still bound. And this is letters written by him and to him by William Henry Wills. And R.C. Lehman is the editor, and I believe R.C. Lehman is a sort of a descendant cousin of William Henry Wills. William Henry Wills was a confidant of Dickens. He was a friend of Dickens. And when Dickens wanted to headline, add his famous name to something like Household Words or All the Year Round, it was Wills that did the grunt work. It was Wills that went and found the pieces. It was Wills that massaged the substandard stuff into something that Dickens might think was worth running under that headline. Not that Dickens was a showboat. When he was around, he worked as hard as anybody at doing exactly those kinds of jobs. And I always, in little bits and pieces, a few of these letters have been published before. In Wills's own, Lehman, I think, wrote a book, a memoir about the publishing world, and it reprinted a few of these letters. They've turned up. They've been referenced in a few Dickens biographies that I've read, and in every one of them, every time I read them, I think, boy, this is really a path not taken. This is Dickens clearly relishing a world he was soon to leave. His fame was just going to drive him out of it. All of a sudden, he could make a king's ransom on speaking tours, reading tours, writing the books that were getting him his advances. That your editing work, your in the trenches editing work, is going to suffer when that happens. But this is a collection of those letters, and they range across 30 years. I think these go from the late 1830s to the 1890s, something like that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful collection. I can't wait to dig into this thing, and maybe it will give me Charles Dickens. Maybe it will. I can only hope. This next one is one that I got from the publisher. This is Yale University. Yeah, Yale University Press. I got this from the publisher in 2019, I believe this was. We may have even seen it on this channel. Yeah, 2019. The writer is David Dowling, and this is A Delicate Aggression, which is basically his history of the Iowa Writers' Workshop in Iowa City, Iowa, on the banks of the Iowa River. The Iowa Writers' Workshop, the most famous writing workshop of them all, and one of the first ones to have any kind of branding or international standing. Lots of fantastic writers came out of the writing workshop and then stopped coming out of the writing workshop, and now the writing workshop, the Iowa Writers' Workshop, is the same as every other workshop. It's more representation. It's only box checking. But for a long time it wasn't that. For a long time no one thought that appeasing puritanical censors who are threatening to destroy your life if you don't appease them, no one thought that was going to happen. At the time when the Iowa Writers' Workshop started, there were a whole bunch of people who attended it and taught at it who may have thought, well, there but for the grace of God, that's what things are like in the Soviet Union, but they'll never be like that here. Now they are like that, and there was no government takeover. We allowed it to become that way. But this is his story, and I had this. I had the advanced copy and the finished copy. I saw it at the Brattle. I checked to see whether or not this copy was mine. It never was. And I also had that momentary question. Okay, so this isn't your copy. That way you would know that you had it before. But also that quick instinct that you have when you look at something in a bookstore and you think, I don't actually have a copy of that. I don't think I do. I haven't done a search yet, but I'm willing to bet this book wasn't here. So this was to fill that gap. And then this last one, we're finally at the end. This is from an ornithologist, a great ornithologist who used to be a wonderful raconteur about birds and all things bird related on the island of Nantucket, off the coast of Massachusetts, a long, long time ago. A wonderful sort of spiky but very generous speaker, and a natural born teacher. And this is a book that he wrote. This is his name is John Dennis. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that he's dead. And this is called A Complete Guide to Bird Feeding. And of course, because it's so big, there's John Dennis right there. Because it's such a big book, you know that it's not a complete guide to bird. Books like this never are just a guide to bird feeding, any more than the book this side would be about planting your garden. Instead, there's lots and lots of extra stuff. The author is going to tell anecdotes about birds, tell anecdotes about the weather, tell natural history about birds. I know that will happen in this book. This author absolutely could not resist doing that. I grabbed this thing because it has lots of original artwork all throughout, and will be full of the author's personality. I know that it will be. There's no chance this is just a how-to guide. But I wasn't risking anything to get it, right? It was dirt cheap, so I grabbed it. The only criticism, there's a faint breath of criticism I can give to this thing, is that this cover is complete fiction. I don't know about the rest of this, but these sparrows, at least in my experience, the sparrows would not be just calmly eating while everybody else ate. They would be fighting with everybody else and each other. It wouldn't be, oh, we have lots of food. It would be, what have you got? Why do you have better food than I did? Wait a minute, I wanted that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I just have a bad batch, a particularly South Boston batch of sparrows. It could be. And don't get me wrong, I love them. I have sparrows in the front hedges. I feed them several times every day. They know to expect food from me. Although that feeding attention has now been diverted, or I should say multiplied, because I now have squirrels, 2 boy squirrels. I'd be willing to bet from the coloration of their tails that they are brothers. They are actual siblings. They're pretty big. The one is slightly bigger than the other, and the bigger of the 2 is almost fetus size. Not that that's very big. Sorry, baby. It's just not very big. They come to the back, and I am teaching them to acclimate to me so that I can be right there watching them and maybe even talking to them, and they won't run away. I'm teaching them to do that, and I'm making great strides. So it could be that in a very little time I'm going to start finding squirrel books, or need to. Although the one thing that I've heard from people who do that sort of thing, feed the squirrels near their house or near their apartment building or whatever, that I absolutely can't do is condition them to come inside for food, because I think that would be a bloodbath. They'll have to stay outside, but I would like to get to know them. I'd even like to be able at some point, maybe this winter, to open that window with a filbert in my hand and have them take it from my fingers. I don't think that's impossible at all. Not at all. Not with the progress that I've made so far. So I've got needy mouths to feed at both ends of the house. But anyway, that's your Brattle trip for today. Today is the only day this week that is not going to be rampagingly hot. Today was chokingly humid, but the rest of the week is going to be a heat wave. Now, all of the major cable news programs are saying it's not. Technically, a heat wave has to be 3 consecutive days where the temperature is 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. And they are saying, no, one day this week maybe might get to 90. The others will be hot, definitely. They'll be in the mid-80s, but they won't be. And they are simply wrong. I don't know if they're lying, but they are wrong. The rest of this week is going to be a heat wave, with temperatures well in excess of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But not today. So I don't know that I'll be going back to the Brattle this week. You never know. There's a superstar in town. Perhaps that warrants a return trip. But we have, for now, the complete book of bird feeding. We have A Delicate Aggression about the Iowa Writers' Workshop. We have Charles Dickens as editor. A collection of letters that are annotated so that it's not just the letters. You'll get a lot of information. Beacon Hill, an illustrated guide to an area of Boston that I know and love. Umbrella by Ferdinand Mount, about a cousin of Lord Byron. Book of Traveler's Tales by Eric Newby in a trade paperback. The Penguin Book of Lies, that I don't think I've ever seen before. It's going to be a lot of fun to go through. A quick biography of Marcel Bruce by Edmund White. Broadsides by Mordecai Rickler, a collection of reviews and occasional pieces done for money. On Conan Doyle by Michael Durda, who has a number of books on that Books About Books collection. And then 2 old novels by Robert Heinlein. Rocket Ship Galileo and Space Cadet. So not a bad haul at the Brattle. On a very, very humid morning. And that isn't all, of course. I also got a tithe of books for other people that I'm not showing. But this video is plenty long enough, so I'm going to wrap this up. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube. Ooh.